Okay, page 39. Please rise. Baruch et Adonai hamevorach. Baruch Adonai hamevorach leolam va'ed. Baruch Adonai Umavir yom umevi laila, umavdil ben yom uven laila. Adonai tzavaot shemo, el chai v'kayam, tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai ha'ma'ariv aravim. Ahavat olam beit Yisrael amcha, Torah b'Yisrael כי הם חיינו ואורך ימינו ובהם נהגה יומם ולילה ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. ואהבת את אדוני אלוהיך בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך ושילנתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך וקשרתם להיות על ידיך והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך והיה Adonai Elohechem Emer v'menoch azov v'kayam aleinu v'yigura v'ngato anachnu Yisrael amo habaru mi al-malachim v'natakim v'seim k'alayim ויוצא המוליד ישראל מתוכם לחירות ומלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם משה ומרים ובני ישראל לכנו שירה בשמחה רבה ואמרו כל העם מי כמוך בעלים אדוני מי כמוך נדהר בקודש נורא תהילות אוסף אלה מלכותך ראו בניך בוקר ים לבני משה זה אלי אנו ויאמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר כבוד אדוני יעקב וגואלו מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל השכיבנו על אלוהינו שלום יעבדנו לכנו וסוסנו ושקעת שמך ותחתנו בצעה טובה ומפלגה וצוק רב את החסירים כי שומרים כי מעלך ושמור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים ושלום יתה ויד עולם ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך ברוך אתה אדוני הפורש סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל ירושלים. וידבר משה מועדי אדוני אל בני ישראל יקרא ויקדש שמי רבה ועלמא דברה חיותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון ובימיכון ובחיי לכל בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב וימרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם עולמי עלמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתעלה 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 שמי דקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן.
Rise in body or in spirit for the silent Amidah, page 47 through page 52. When you're finished, you may be seated.
יקרא ויגרע שמי רבה, ויעמד דברה חיותי וימליך מלכותי בחייכון ובימיכון ובחיי לכל בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב ויאמרו אמן יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם עולמי עלמיה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתעלה 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 שמי לקודשה בריחו לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ואמרו תקבל צלותכון ובתכון דכל ישראל קודם אבוהונדי וישמעיה ואמרו יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן עושה שלום בברומיו הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו אמן.
Okay, let's go ahead. I'll invite you to rise. Page, let's see, 79.
79. ספריף חברי, ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, אשר בחר בנו מכל עם ורוממנו מכל לשון, וקידשנו במצוותיו. ותיתן לנו אדוני אלוהינו באהבה, מועדים לשמחה, חגים וזמנים לששון, את יום חג השבועות הזה. זמן מתן תורתנו מקרא קודש, זכר ליציאת מצרים, כי בנו בחרת ואותנו קידשת מכל העמים, ומועדי קודשך בשמחה ובששון הנחלתנו. ברוך אתה אדוני מקדש ישראל והזמנים.
We will turn now to
301.
what was it?
301.
301. Page 301 for Aleinu for main standing.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצא וראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שרותי שמיים יוזר הארץ, ומשה דרבר שמיים אלוקינו דוד ויקבלו כולם את כל מלכותך, ותמלוך עליהם מהרה לעולם ועד, כי הוא מחוז שחל היא ומלאי תמלוך בכבוד, ככתוב בתורתך, אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד, ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא, יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו
You may be seated, page 302, mourners and those observing yard sites. Yikadav Yikadash Meirba,
Amen.
Be'almad Yivrach Yertevim Lich Malchute, B'chayechon Uv'yomechon Uv'chayedechol Be'Yisrael, Pagala V'izman Kari V'imru.
Amen.
Yesh Me Rabba Mevarach Le'olam Olmei Amaya, Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yipar V'yitromam V'yinaseh, V'yitadar V'yitalei V'yitalal Shemei Kusha. Leila min kol berchata v'shirata, tush bechata v'ne'emata, dam yiram be'alma v'imru.
Amen.
Yesh lama rabba min shemaya, echaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru.
Amen.
Osei shalom b'romav, uyasei shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. All right, does that conclude our service? Okay. Hey, by the way, that last prayer, Christian friends might here like to know, that last prayer was actually not in Hebrew. That was in Aramaic, which was the vernacular at the time of Jesus. So Jesus would have totally understood that. So we are going to get started with our, what we call a Tikkun Leil Shavuot. Like I said, in some communities, this goes literally all night long. Not so much in our community. We usually go till somewhere between 11 and midnight. And out of respect for our guests, so that they aren't here till 11 o'clock or midnight, unless they really want to be, we'll invite them to go first. And I've invited Elder Miller and Brother Ahmed to share with us each a teaching from their respective faiths that coincides with the message of our holiday here, of Revelation or Conversion. And then our Jewish clergy, starting with Rabbi Hecht, will present after that. We'll say for our Gentile friends, our Latter-day Saint friends, and our Muslim friend, we'll give them about 15 minutes each, again, so they can get a good night's sleep. And for the Jewish clergy, they'll each get about half an hour, just so that we have a little more Torah study. So anyhow, with that said, I'd love to invite Elder Miller, if you would do us the honors by coming here and being our first teacher this evening. Then Brother Ahmed can follow, and then after that I'll invite Rabbi Hecht to come on up. And again, you are welcome to stay for all of it, of course, but typically in our community, as it does get late, some folks start kind of heading out when they get tired, and don't worry, you won't offend us if that's the case, but you're of course more than welcome to stay.
Thank you, Rabbi Spector, for this great honor to be able to share a reading from the Book of Mormon this evening. The reading that I have selected is from the Book of Alma in the Book of Mormon. This is a very famous teaching within our faith as it relates to Revelation. Maybe I'll give just a bit of context for who Alma was. He was a prophet in the Book of Mormon. But he came to his prophetic calling in a bit of a different path. His father was also a prophet. In fact, he was the founder of the church during his time. But as often is the case, some children don't follow the paths of their parents, and that was the case for Alma. He went about with his friends who were the sons of the king of the time, and they went about trying to destroy the church. Alma and his friends experienced a miraculous conversion. In fact, when an angel came and visited them and commanded them to stop persecuting the members of the church and stop trying to destroy the church, and that if they didn't stop, that they would be destroyed. Well, with that choice, Alma decided that he would heed the words of this angel and had, as I said, a miraculous conversion and became later on in his life the leader of the church. He went on many missions to the people, proclaiming the good word of the gospel. And on one of those missions, he gave this very famous teaching, where he compared faith to a seed. I'll begin by reading verse 28 in chapter 32 of the book of Alma. Now we will compare the word unto a seed. And if you will give place that a seed may be planted in your heart, behold, if it be a true seed or a good seed, if you do not cast it out by your unbelief, that ye will resist the Spirit of the Lord, behold, the seed will begin to swell within your breast. And when you feel these swellings, you will begin to say within yourselves, it must needs be that this is a good seed, or that the word is good, for it beginneth to enlarge my soul, yea, it beginneth to enlighten my understanding, yea, it beginneth to be delicious unto me. Now behold, would not this increase your faith? I say unto you, yea, nevertheless, this has not grown up into a perfect knowledge. But behold, as the seed swelleth and sprouteth and beginneth to grow, then ye must needs say that the seed is good. For behold, it swelleth and sprouteth and beginneth to grow. And now behold, will this not strengthen your faith? Yea, it will strengthen your faith. For ye will say, I know that this is a good seed. For behold, it sprouteth and beginneth to grow. And now behold, are ye sure that this is a good seed? I say unto you, yea, for every seed bringeth forth its own likeness. Therefore, if a seed groweth, it is good. But if it groweth not, behold, it is not good. Therefore, it is cast away. And now behold, because ye have tried the experiment, and planted the seed, and it swelleth and sprouteth and beginneth to grow, ye must know that this seed is good. Later in this same chapter, Alma goes on to talk about what happens as we continue to nourish the good word of God, that seed in our hearts. On to verse 39. And thus, if ye will nourish the word, looking forward with an eye of faith to the fruit thereof, if you do not nourish the word, you can never pluck of the fruit of the tree of life. But if ye will nourish the word, yea, nourish the tree as it beginneth to grow, by your faith and with great diligence and with patience, looking forward to the fruit thereof, it shall take root, and behold, it shall be a tree springing up into everlasting life. And because of your diligence and your faith and your patience and the word in nourishing it, that it may take root in you, behold, by and by ye shall pluck the fruit thereof, which is most precious, which is sweet above all that which is sweet, and which is white above all that which is white, yea, and pure above all that which is pure. And ye shall feast upon this fruit, even until ye are filled, that ye hunger not, neither shall ye thirst. I'd also like to share one scripture from a more modern day revelation that is part of the canon of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. This was a revelation that was given to the prophet Joseph Smith in very dire circumstances. He had been falsely accused and falsely imprisoned, torn from his family, and his people, while living in Missouri, were driven out of their homes. The homes were burned. The women, many of them, were ravaged. And many of the men, the leaders of the church, were put into a jail, ironically called Liberty. Here in this situation, Joseph Smith received two revelations, two sections of our Doctrine and Covenants that are very sacred and holy and quoted often. In these very dire circumstances, Joseph Smith received this answer to his prayer about why this had happened. And let me read this one verse to you that is sacred to us. If thou shalt be cast into a pit, or into the hands of murderers, and the sentence of death passed upon thee, if thou be cast into the deep, if the billowing surge conspire against thee, if fierce winds become thine enemy, if the heavens gather blackness, and all the elements combine to hedge up the way, and above all, if the very jaws of hell shall gape open the mouth wide after thee, know thou, my son, that all these things shall give experience and shall be for thy good. The reason that I read this particular verse as it relates to Revelation is because although we have these two sections of our Doctrine and Covenants that talk about the answer that Joseph received to his prayer of why his people were being persecuted and why he had been cast into a prison, before those revelations were received, Joseph wrote in a letter to his wife Emma, where he describes how he cries out to God from the, quote, "squeaking iron doors of a lonesome, dark, dirty prison." And he received, as he described it in his letter to Emma, no answer and no comfort, only silence. Of course, by the verse that I read to you, we know that ultimately God did answer Joseph and did teach him that all of those things would give him experience and be for his good. Among one of the things that Joseph learned was the character of divine silence, the waiting that he had to do before he received the revelation from God. This is what one of our apostles, President Jeffrey R. Holland, president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, said about this. I thought about this because I know that Elder Holland is a good friend of Rabbi Spector's, and they often study the Word of God together. And so this caught my eye when I read it and thought it would be a perfect opportunity to share with all of you. This is what Elder Holland said: when you have to, you can have sacred, revelatory, profoundly instructive experiences with God in any situation you are in. Indeed, let me say that even a little stronger. You can have sacred, revelatory, profoundly instructive experiences with God in the most miserable experiences of your life, in the worst settings, while enduring the most painful injustices, when facing insurmountable odds and opposition greater than you have ever faced. This is why we all have faith. This is why we plant the seed of faith in our hearts. This is why we act in our faith. And the great blessing that we receive, the great gift that we receive when we choose to plant that seed, when we choose to act in faith, is more faith. And by, just as Alma described, that seed grows into a tree from which we can all pluck the most precious fruit of the tree of life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elder Miller. And our tradition, when somebody offers a beautiful teaching, we say Yasher Koach, which means like, it's kind of like saying, may the force be with you. Somebody else ripped it off. We made a lot more money off of it than we did. But anyways, Yasher Koach, thank you for that beautiful teaching. Brother Aves Ahmed, if you would please share with us a teaching from your faith, and then we'll get into some Jewish texts.
So tonight I'm going to talk about Moses in the Quran. So, great job by Elder Miller. That was very inspiring. It's kind of a tough act to follow, but I'm going to speak about Moses in the Quran. So Moses in Arabic is Musa, and he's considered one of the head of the prophets, one of the head of the Anbiya is what we call him as a prophet. And he had this specific distinction. We believe that God gave different miracles to different prophets. We believe he had the distinction of Kalimullah, which means he could speak directly to God. And he's mentioned in 30 different surahs, and he's mentioned 130 different times in the Quran. So he's actually the prophet most mentioned in the Quran by name. Jesus is mentioned 20 some odd times, other prophets are mentioned, but he's mentioned over 130 times. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about his life, a little bit about how he's mentioned, so you can see how the different narratives shape up. So Musa alayhi salam was born at a time when Pharaoh orders the killing of Israelite male infants. So in the Quran it says in Surah Al-Qasas, so we inspired the mother of Moses, suckle him, but when you fear for him, cast him into the river, and do not fear nor grieve. Indeed, we will return him to you and make him one of the messengers. So later on, he's found and adopted by the Pharaoh's wife. And it says Al-Qasas in the Quran, and the wife of the Pharaoh said, he will be a comfort of the eye for me and for you. Do not kill him. Perhaps he may benefit us, or we may adopt him as a son. So then he's called to prophethood and the burning bush. And we believe also that Musa alayhi salam, or Moses, he had a stutter. And we believe that the Pharaoh started to suspect by different things that this could be the prophet that he was worried about. So the wife of the Pharaoh said that, he actually got an idea. He said, let me put a burning bit of coal in his mouth. And if he's a prophet, it won't burn him, and if he is, then we'll kill him. So that's how, in the Islamic tradition, he got the stutter. So he's called to be a prophet, and in Surah Taha, he says, he receives the revelation at Mount Sinai from God, right, that says, indeed I am Allah. There is no deity except me. So worship me and establish my prayer for my remembrance. And this is like very elucidated in the Quran and in Hadith, which is like Moses, he was the only prophet that could, he actually talked to God. He insisted with God, he pleaded with God. Instead of just a one-way revelation, he actually, he had a discourse. So in the Quran, he's commanded, along with his brother, to go to the Pharaoh and demand the release of the children of Israel. So that's in Surah Taha. Go both of you to the Pharaoh, indeed he has transgressed. Just 1 second here. So some things about Moses. In the Quran, he's mentioned as tall. He's mentioned as a very strong personality. And he was also very respected by the Prophet Muhammad. During the time when the Prophet was, when he was prosecuted by his people, when he was persecuted by his people and he left, he always remembered the Prophet Moses. And so when he came and he made a prayer, he said, "My Lord, expand for me my chest and ease for me my task, and untie the knot from my tongue, that they may understand my speech." And then with this, we believe that God also gave his prophet Harun, Aaron, as a prophet. So many times when you see Muslims give a speech, right, before a speech, they start their speech with this, that God untie my tongue. So some of the miracles that were given to Moses in the Quran, that his staff was turned into a snake, his hand shone bright, and when the Pharaoh challenged him with magicians, Moses threw down the staff and it swallowed their illusions. In the Quran it says, in Ash-Shu'ara, then Moses threw his staff, and behold, it devoured what they falsified. The magicians fell in prostration, saying, "We believe in the Lord of the worlds, the Lord of Moses and Aaron." So the parting of the sea and the Exodus. So according to the Quran, the Pharaoh in his arrogance refused to let the Israelites go. Eventually, God commanded Musa to lead his people out. In the Quran, it's narrated, as they reached the sea, trapped between the water and Pharaoh's army, the people panicked. But Moses stood firm. Surah Ash-Shu'ara, Musa alayhi salam says, Moses said, "No, indeed, with me is my Lord, he will guide me." Then God commanded, "Strike the sea with your staff," and the sea parted, which is the miracle that we all know, where the sea was parted and Moses and the people escaped, and Pharaoh and his men were drowned. So further on, the revelation of the Torah is elucidated in the Quran, and it says, "And we wrote for him on the tablets of all things, instruction and explanation of all things." And then furthermore, it explains the test of the golden calf. The Quran says in Surah Taha that, "My Lord, forgive me and my brother and admit us into your mercy, for you are the most merciful of the merciful." We also believe that when Moses was away, some of his people were deceived into worshiping a golden calf. When he returned, he was obviously heartbroken and angry, but he pleaded to God with that prayer. So we believe that Musa alayhi salam, or Moses, is a symbol for many things, right? We also believe he showed the way, he showed strength through persecution. He left somewhere, just as the Prophet Muhammad left from Mecca to Medina, as Joseph Smith left. So he showed those things, and he showed the perseverance through hardships. The other thing that I think is very, very interesting, that Muslims have to be very thankful to Moses, is we believe that the Prophet Muhammad ascended in a night journey called the Miraj. So we believe he went up to heaven with an angel. He went from Mecca he went to Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, and then we believe he ascended. And he ascended through the 7 heavens, and he talked to different prophets on the way. And on the 7th heaven, we believe that Moses, or Musa alayhi salam, was there. And after the 7th heaven, Muslims believe there's a place called Sidratul Muntaha where nothing else can go. So we believe that the Prophet Muhammad went and spoke to God. And he spoke to God, and he came down, and he told the Prophet Moses that God has instructed me that my people should pray 50 prayers. And Moses said, "Look, I know these people. they're not going to be able to do that. And so he went back and said, this is the advice I got from my brother. All the way back until he came down with 5. And we believe that the Prophet Moses still told the Prophet Muhammad that this is too much. I know these guys, this is you're asking too much. But then in our tradition, the Prophet Muhammad was embarrassed to keep on going back and negotiating. But as you can see, he's really, really regarded as one of the closest people to God, the Kalimullah. And I hope that was enlightening to some extent, and really appreciate you guys for giving me the time to speak up here.
All right, thank you, Brother Ahmed. Man, let's see, I'd love to, we're now going into some of our Jewish text study. I'd love to invite Rabbi Hecht to lead us in a teaching. I think Rabbi, if you want to come on up here, I can distribute if you got some stuff to hand out.
Hi, for those of you who are online, Rabbi Jonathan Hecht, and we are passing out a passage from the Talmud, from the tractate called Shabbat. And this translation, I'm going to just tell everybody as briefly as possible because I know I don't have a lot of time. This translation of the Talmud, which is written, by the way, in Aramaic, is a translation done by Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. It's the Koren edition. Rabbi, do you have this in the library, the Koren edition? It's a very new version of. Yeah. So the Koren edition, the Steinsaltz has done. First of all, he's brought Talmud study to Israelis in general. Oh, this is good too, right? Yeah, both. Okay. But what he does is, in the bold-faced part of the translation, you've got the actual translation of the text, and then he fills in a whole bunch of other information so you could understand what the reading's all about. In order to save time, we're just going to read the bold-faced part. Okay, so that's first of all. Second of all, I'll do the reading, I think, because this way everyone can hear me at home. I want to say that this text is the text that I study with the students in rabbinical school the week that they are ordained. So they've spent 5 years studying with us, and this is sort of at their consecration service just before they are ordained. I study this text with them. And it is a text that talks about what rabbis should do, which is why we use it. And it's also critical of the rabbinate. It's critical of the rabbis. And that's one thing that we should take a note of here, is that the Jewish tradition, the Talmud, we're willing to be critical of our greatest heroes. In case you're wondering, if you are not sure about that, come to a board meeting and you'll find out. So if you open up to the very first page, I'm going to read, and I think I can do it a little bit faster. In this section which is an additional section from the Mishnah, it's called the Braita. It's material that did not make it into the Mishnah, but it's contemporaneous with the text called the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda is described as head of the speakers in every place. And the Talmud, the Gemara, asks, why did they call him head of the speakers in every place? How did he get this title? And they say it's because of this story. It just happens to be that these 4 rabbis were sitting, 3 rabbis and 1 non-rabbi was sitting around and studying. Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yosei and Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, the son of Yochai, were sitting and studying. And Yehuda, who was a son of converts, sat beside them. So right away, I already told you, converts shouldn't be identified as converts, so there's a problem already. The text is going to have a number of difficult passages like this. And it's important, though, because he has non-Jewish people in his family, he's going to go and relate what happened in the conversation that the rabbis had, and some of the people that will hear this in his family will report this to the Romans. Okay, that's why it's important that this is who he is. Rabbi Yehuda opened and said, "How pleasant are the actions of this nation, the Romans, as they establish marketplaces. They established bridges, and they established bathhouses." Rabbi Yosei, very, very smart, doesn't say anything. Don't want to say anything that's inappropriate. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai responded and said, "Everything that the Romans established, they established only for their own purposes. They established marketplaces to put prostitutes in them, bathhouses to pamper themselves, bridges to collect taxes from all of those who pass over them." Now Yehuda, son of the converts, went and related their statements to his household, and until they finally reached the Romans themselves, the monarchy, and they ruled. Yehuda, who talked about how great we were, elevated the Roman regime, shall be elevated and appointed as head of the sages, the head of the speakers in every place. Yosei, who remained silent, well, we'll exile him from his home in Judea, and they sent him to Tzipori in the Galilee. And Rabbi Shimon, who denounced us, death. Right? He shall be killed. So you see, the Romans are the greatest enemies of the Jewish people. They're going to destroy the temple, and they've already destroyed the temple. So but here they're talking and they're saying, look, then Romans are pretty good. Why? Commerce, hygiene, right? Yeah, look at all the things that they do that help us in the world, right? And Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai and his son have to now go into hiding. They hid in the study hall. Every day, Rabbi Shimon's wife would bring them bread and a jug of water, and they would eat. But when the decree intensified, Rabbi Shimon says to his son, women, they're easily impressionable. And lest the authorities capture her and torture her, she'll tell them where we are. Okay, it's a very negative statement about women. Okay, again, another troubling text here. Troubling. Just hold on to that. So they went now and they hid in a cave. A miracle occurred, and a carob tree was created for them, as well as a spring of water. So that's how they got their food and their water. And they would remove their clothes and sit in the sand up to their necks, and they would study Torah all day. Okay, imagine this. They take their clothing off and they bury themselves in the sand, so only their heads are sticking up, and they're studying Torah. Okay? At the time of prayer, you see, you cannot be undressed when you pray. It's inappropriate. They would unbury themselves, they would dress, they would cover themselves, and they would pray. And then they would remove their clothing again so that the clothing would not wear out. They sat in the cave for 12 years. And then Elijah came, Elijah the prophet, who is this messenger who appears in Jewish life when in these stories. And he stood at the entrance of the cave and said, "Who will inform Bar Yochai that the emperor has died and the decree has been abrogated?" So let me just stop here for a second. What were the things that Rome was praised for? What were the things? Right, the marketplaces, the bridges, right, the bathhouses. That's what the Roman world is like. All things that are useful in the physical world. What's life in the cave? Did somebody say death? Did I hear death? Right. So first of all, they have the tree of life, the carob tree. So they have Torah, though. That's the message. They have Torah. And what else is in, what do they do? What's the activity? There are two things they're doing. What are they? There's study and there's prayer. So they're studying and they're praying. And how do they study? Okay, the things that the Romans are praised for are the physical things. The things that the Jewish activities are intellectual and spiritual. There is a denial of physicality. They bury themselves in the sand, and just their heads are sticking up, right? So this is what they're doing. It shows you the difference between the Romans and Jewish life, in the cave anyway, in the cave. So now they emerge after 12 years of study. They've got a tremendous amount of Torah knowledge, which is good for us talking about in Shavuot. Look at all of this knowledge they have. They emerge from the cave and they see Jewish people who are doing what? Plowing and sowing. And Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, look at these Jews, these people. They are abandoning eternal life. That's what you get from study of Torah. They are going to get eternal life through the study. They're abandoning it and they're engaging in temporal life, the things that the Romans were praised for. And now the Gemara, the Talmud relates that in every place that Rabbi Shimon and his son directed their eyes, immediately burned up. Look at the power that they have. This is X-Men movie. Cyclops, he takes off his glasses and everything he looks at burns up. This is tremendous power. This is what you can do with Torah. They got this power to be able to do this. And what is God's response? A divine voice emerges and says to them, did you emerge from the cave in order to destroy my world? Back into the cave. They went back and they sat for another 12 months, another year. That was their punishment. So look at we had the world of the Romans, we had the world of the cave, and now you have God's world. And what does God say? Is this what we are supposed to be doing with Torah? Just burning up my world? That's not what Torah is all about. So they return to the cave. They go back in again and they sit for another 12 months. But there's a teaching, the judgment of the wicked in Gehenna, in hell, lasts only for 12 months. And so surely 12 months is enough time. Now a divine voice emerges again and says, emerge from the cave. And they emerged. And now it's different. Everywhere that Rabbi Elazar would look at and strike, Rabbi Shimon would look at and heal. And now they say to each other, Rabbi Shimon says to Rabbi Elazar, my son, you and I are enough for the entire world. This is a very difficult passage, so I'm sorry to give you without doing it in the discussion. But what is it saying? They emerged from the cave, the actual cave that they were in, but in their minds, they are still in the cave. It's still just the two of them. They don't need anybody else. And what are they doing? Destroying and fixing, destroying and fixing. Okay. This is a very critical text of the rabbis. I'm just going to you just have to understand that, which to me makes it more powerful as a rabbi studying this. So now, the second world is outside of the cave, but the cave exists in the rabbis' minds. And now, as the sun is setting on Sabbath Eve, Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Elazar see an elderly man Jewish man who's going home with 2 myrtle branches in his hand, and he's running at twilight. It's almost Shabbat. He's got to get home before Shabbat starts. And they say to him, "Hey, buddy, what's the deal with the 2 myrtles?" And we have this. We have how many candles on Shabbos? 2 candles, right? We have 2, okay? So one of them is 1 thing of myrtle is enough to make your house smell nice. And he answers them saying, it's corresponding to the 2 times in the 10 Commandments that it tells us to keep the Shabbat. Remember the Shabbat day and keep it holy in the book of Exodus, and observe the Shabbat and keep it holy in the book of Deuteronomy. That's why we have 2 candles, by the way. That's why we have 2 candles, same reason, okay? And now Rabbi Shimon looks at his son and says, look at how beloved the mitzvot are to Israel, and their minds are at ease. Why do you think their minds are at ease? The Jews are figuring out a way to live in the temporal world and observe the commandments. Where Shimon and his son were in the cave thinking that this is the world that they're living in. So now, this is, by the way, this is as far as most rabbis study this text. We're going to go further, okay? So Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair, who is Rabbi Shimon's son-in-law, heard that his father-in-law and brother-in-law have out of the cave, and he goes out to greet them. And he brings him to the bathhouse. Need I remind you, the Romans were praised by having a bathhouse. And they began massaging his flesh, which of course, being buried in the sand all those years, I'm sure was a little leathery. And it says he sees how Rabbi Shimon has cracks on the skin of his body, and his son-in-law is crying, and the tears fell from his eyes and caused Rabbi Shimon pain. Rabbi Pinchas said to Rabbi Shimon, his father-in-law, "Woe, that I see you like this." And Rabbi Shimon says, "No, happy you should be, because had you not seen me like this, you would not have found me in this level of Torah." It was the level of Torah that he achieved from all those years of study, right? Are powerful. And at first, and then they tell you how powerful it is. At first, when Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai would raise a difficulty in the Talmud, Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair would respond to his question with 12 answers. Ultimately, when Rabbi Pinchas ben Yair would raise a difficulty, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai could now respond with 24 answers. So look how great his Torah is. Rabbi Shimon says, so let's just stop for a second, right? So this is we're starting to see a transformation of the rabbis, of what they should be doing, teaching Torah. Right? And now Rabbi Shimon says this: since a miracle transpired for me, I will go and repair something for the sake of others, in gratitude for God's kindness. And then he gives you the proof text of why you do that. Just like in the story in the Bible, Jacob, it says, and he quotes it, and Jacob came whole, shalem, to the city of Shechem. And then the rabbinic interpretation is that Rav, who is another rabbi, said, this means Jacob came whole in his body, whole in his money, whole in his Torah. Like, these are all the things that, by the way, in the cave, they didn't have these things. He wasn't whole in his body, right? Or money. He was only whole in his Torah. And he graced the countenance of the city. He performed a gracious act to benefit the city when he came to Shechem. Rav said, Jacob established currency for them. The Romans, think the Romans, the marketplace, right? Rabbi Shmuel said he established marketplaces for them. And Rabbi Yochanan said he established bathhouses for them. So now, what does Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai do? He says, is there something around here that needs repair? And they say to him, there is a place where there is uncertainty with regard to ritual impurity. Now, this may not mean that much to you guys, but the rabbis make a big deal out of trying to figure out how to lessen uncertainty in the world. Let's put it in this way for people who know these stories. Is the chicken kosher? Let's go ask the rabbi. The rabbi's job is to lessen the uncertainty. This is part of a rabbinic, of what rabbis do. And so, there's a place where there's uncertainty with regard to ritual impurity, and the priests, the Kohanim, who are not allowed to go into a cemetery, are troubled because they have to walk around it, lest there are corpses buried there and they trample upon it. Priests are not allowed to enter into a cemetery even today. People who observe this will not go into, if they're a Kohen, they will not go. So this is what Rabbi Shimon does. He says, well, is there anybody who knows whether there was at some time in the past a presumption that there was ritual purity here? This is one of the methods of determining how to eliminate uncertainty. You guys just put in a mikveh. This is the great story of the great issue of the mikveh. The mikveh has to have a certain amount of water in it. Now let's say they discover that the mikveh is short a couple of gallons of water from the amount it's supposed to have. Now you have uncertainty. What's the uncertainty? Whether or not that mikveh that we brought our dishes to last week to make them pure was actually a kosher mikveh. Maybe it didn't have enough water, right? And so the question is everything impure from that mikveh? Okay. Or from this moment that we discovered, is everything pure? So this is how they're trying to figure this out. The presumption of that it once was pure means that everything is before it is pure until the moment that we discovered that it was impure. There's the alternate, which is all the other things are unkosher. But this is how he's going to fix the cemetery story. So an elder says to him, hey, there used to be a rabbi named Yochanan ben Zakkai who used to plant plants here, and then he'd have to separate from the plants the amount that had to be donated to the temple, which is called truma, and that means that he must have thought that this place was kosher. Right? He wouldn't have planted the plants here if the place was a cemetery. He wouldn't have done that. And so now Shimon Bar Yochai says, oh, okay, so every place that I go to that is hard, I'm going to assume by presumption of status quo ante, what it used to be, that this is still kosher. But anything that's soft, there might be a corpse buried there. And that's what he does. I'm skipping to the end of the paragraph. I just told you what he said. But now somebody says, hey, this is the board member who's complaining, right? An elder said, hey, Ben Yochai, Yochanan ben Yochai, he's purifying the cemetery. Rabbi Shimon says to him, had you not been with us, you would not have been counted with us in the number, that we agreed that this was how to remove the uncertainty. Now that you're here with us and you're saying this, then this is inappropriate behavior. And the example that he gives is this terrible example, but I will say it because it's very interesting. If even prostitutes help each other by putting on makeup, even though they're competing for customers, shouldn't the rabbis do the same thing? Okay? And then he looks around and he sees Yehuda, who is son of a convert, and says, you're still in this world? And that person is struck down. Okay. That's the text. The question that this text deals with is, first of all, the issue of the correct rabbinic behavior. What's the role of what a rabbi does? It comes in the end. He fixes a place he lessens uncertainty in the world, or she lessens uncertainty in the world. A rabbi helps congregants safely pass through life. That's what he does. He repairs the cemetery so the Kohanim can pass through. That's the role of rabbinic behavior, to fix the world so that it's safe for you and me to go through it. That's the first answer here. The second question is the question of spirituality and physicality. The Romans were known for the physical. The Jews were known for the spiritual. This text is playing with the question, where does Judaism take place? Does it take place in the cave where you don't need your body? Or does it take place in the world? This text is saying you have to come out of the cave and live in the world. Torah is not meant to be kept in the cave. In fact, we could say that why this text is so negative about these guys is because they are cavemen. Look at what they say about their wives. Right? Look at how they behave, how they talk about other people. Look at how they use their knowledge. They use their knowledge to show how great they are. To say, yeah, what you're doing here is terrible. This is wrong. They're not willing to build the world. They want to use their knowledge to stifle it, to lessen it. We all know people who are like that, who don't want to talk plainly. They want to talk in very high level language. So after all, if you can't understand what I'm saying, obviously you're not smart enough. So the text here is saying that this is not what rabbis do. Okay? Yes, Torah study gives you power, but then what are you going to do with it? Now my favorite part here. Where does Judaism take place? It takes place in the world. I know everyone's going to say that. But look at what these rabbis did. When they were in the cave, and when they first came out of the cave, they were still in the cave in their minds. They are saying, God lives in our cave, in our minds, not in the world. Right? God lives in our backyard, not in the world. And the text is saying, wrong. You live in my backyard. That's what God is saying to us. You live in my backyard. It's not your backyard that I live in. You live in my backyard. And what this means is that and that's what God says. You came out to destroy Olami, my world. That's why you came out. Get back into the cave. You don't understand. You're in my backyard. I'm not captured in yours. It is a very powerful text. Now, I will also tell you that I already dealt with the issue of the women issue, that misogynistic passage. We don't have to talk about that. It shows you what kind of boors these men were, cavemen. How might the text be used to describe Jewish life today? I not only use this, by the way, with rabbinical students, I use it with bar mitzvah kids and bat mitzvah and b'nai mitzvah kids. And what do I say to them? If you think that the hour you come to religious school and the amount of times we require you to come to services, that's Jew time, you're living in a cave. Being Jewish means taking the teachings of Judaism out of the cave and into the world. And that's the powerful message that comes here in this text. Chag Sameach, everyone.
Thank Thank you, Rabbi Hecht. That was awesome. Love that. What a privilege for us to have you here before you depart after a very, I'm hoping, meaningful and wonderful year in Utah. And only one more month until maybe I can be the most learned and wise rabbi in the city of Utah. And probably not. But thank you, Rabbi Hecht. That was awesome. Cantor Davis, do you have a text to share with us? Thank you to our guests for coming this evening. See, some of you think I'm being generous by going last and gracious to others. My goal is, if nobody's left, I don't have to do anything. Just kidding.
Chag Sameach, everybody. Okay, I've got some handouts if anyone would like to follow along. Rabbi can help distribute them to those who are here. So I'll preface this by saying that the top sheet here says Shavuot 2023, and I promise I'm not simply recycling my lesson from 2023, but the top page happened to be relevant, so I am recycling that to frame our discussion, which revolves around a single commandment, or maybe it doesn't, but we're going to start with the single commandment that we're going to read tomorrow in Parshat Yitro, where we go through the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, and the word is lo tirtzach. That's the commandment. Do not murder. Do not murder. It's a two-word commandment. Pretty straightforward. Do not murder. Okay, so I thought we'd look first at the first murder that we encounter in Genesis 4. We all know the story, right? Vayomer Cain el Hevel achav vayehi. I said to his brother, yada yada yada. And when they're in the field, basadeh vayakom Cain el Hevel. He rises up against his brother and kills him. Okay. He kills him. Now, we know killing, bad. But killing is distinct from murder, right? We don't have a lot of information here. We just know that Cain kills Abel. But on the face of it, looks bad. Okay, and then we know what happens. God says to Cain, "No, where's Abel? Where's your brother?" We think God knows, right? And Abel responds, Cain responds, "How do I know? Am I my brother's keeper?" Okay? And then comes this, "What have you done? Your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Now, I think that's really interesting, okay? And I want to remember that min ha'adamah, from the earth, your brother's blood cries out to me from the earth. Let's just kind of park that, okay? But I have a question first. So what's the real sin here? You can answer me. It's okay. What's the sin? Is it that there's been a murder? Or is it the cover-up? Right? Is it the crime or the cover-up? We always hear this. Okay, so I want to fast forward. We'll fast forward to some commentary on this commandment, lo tirtzach. Ibn Ezra comments on this. Thou shalt not murder. Okay, with your hand or with your tongue. I thought murder was moida, as they said. It was a heart-to-heart. Does anyone remember that show? No? I'm too old for that, I guess. All right. That is by giving false testimony, which results in someone being executed, or by talebearing. Okay, or by wickedly giving someone counsel, which you know will result in his death, or not revealing a secret which you are aware of to someone who would be saved if he knew what you know. If you do not reveal the secret, you are a murderer. Okay. And likewise, if you do reveal the secret. Okay. So, in the interest of time, I'm going to keep moving through this. Let's look at the middle of page, well, they're not numbered, the second page, the middle of the next page. So, here we have from the Holiness Code from Leviticus 19. Lo telech rachil be'amecha, don't be a talebearer among your people. And lo ta'amod, do not profit by, that's the translation, but Rabbi, what would you say? Lo ta'amod, do not stand? It sure sounds like do not stand. That do not stand, al damreyecha, on the blood of your neighbor. Okay, so what does that mean? Right? On the blood of your neighbor. Well, it could mean either violent murder, but it could also mean murder with your tongue, right? Murder of someone's reputation, or murder by sharing information that could lead to someone's death, okay? And once again, Ibn Ezra talks about what's a talebearer, what's a rachil, okay? It's similar to, he gets from Ezekiel, the ideal of merchandise and merchant, right? That someone who trades in information is a rachil. It's not just a gossiper. It's someone who kind of profits or thrives by exchanging information that maybe they shouldn't be exchanging. In some ways, when we think of that information leading to someone's demise, it gives new definition to the idea of merchant of death, right? Okay. Do not stand by idly on the blood of your neighbor. A person should not join bloodthirsty men. Well, now Ibn Ezra seems to be going in a very specific direction. Okay? It is known that many people have been murdered or killed because of slander. But wait, he just said bloodthirsty men. Bloodthirsty men and slander? Which is it, Ibn Ezra? What are you talking about? Well, he's talking about, we think, someone very specific. Someone that most of us have never even heard of. Okay? And that person is named Doeg. Who's Doeg? Who's Doeg, you ask? Okay, well, flip to the next page. Well, all I can tell you is you don't want to be a Doeg. Don't be a Doeg, if I have a motto for tonight. Okay, so we have here in the next page and a half a snippet from Samuel. Okay, Doeg is an Edomite who is in the court of Saul, and he speaks up after an episode where David slips through Saul's fingers. And he speaks up and says, "Hey, Saul, I saw David. He was with this guy Ahimelech, who is a priest." Okay? And he went and inquired to God, and he gave him permissions, but also gave him a sword that from Goliath, his old foe. Okay, thereupon, the king sends for Ahimelech and all the priests from this town called Nob. And they all come to the king, and he calls them out. He says, "How could you do this? How could you rise against me? You gave him food, you gave him shelter, you gave him weapons, you even talked to God for him. And so, state your case." And Ahimelech says, "Look, he was trusted. How would I know? He's your son-in-law, and I'm just trying to be loyal to you." And I think I copied 14 there twice. Oops. Okay, and then he said, "This is the first time I ever met him. This is the first time I ever did this. I've done no wrong." Now, it also could be that Ahimelech is thinking this through and thinking, if Saul's after this guy, and I reveal the information, then I too have committed murder, right? So I can't quite do that. And the king is so angry, he orders his guards to kill Ahimelech and all of the priests from Nob. But the guards seem to be hip to the program here, and they refuse to do it. They're not going to kill priests, especially when the circumstances are murky. And then he turns to this guy, Doeg. And Doeg, he says, go and kill the priests. And what does Doeg do? He goes and kills the priests. All of them. 85 of them. That's a lot of priests. But then he goes back to the town where they all come from, and he puts everyone there to the sword. Men, women, kids, everyone. Even the animals. Who is this guy? Is he the embodiment of evil? Or is he something else? So Psalms has this quote, Psalm 119, your mitzvot make me wiser than my foes, referring to Doeg and Achitophel, whose learning did not conform with halakha. So what is that? What is that about? How is it that he's referred to? Zohar, I'm just going to skip down a little bit, talks about, you've entered a place where no other human being has gone since the time of these two people, when 400 questions were asked concerning a specific tower, it might have been an ark, a closet, suspended in the air, and no one could answer the questions until Solomon himself came along and made it clear. So what's this tell us about Doeg? Is he more than a bloodthirsty murderer? Seems so. He seems to be pretty wise and learned. He can ask all these questions. And it makes one wonder, is there more to this? So we're studying Ruth. It's been talked a lot about. And there's a connection here. Okay, so the commentary on the book of Ruth talks about the praise that Boaz gives to Ruth. Who is this young woman? What is she all about? And the reapers say, oh, she's great. She's this Moabite. She's the best thing since sliced bread. And the commentators say, similarly, when Saul saw David victorious over Goliath, he says, who is this guy? He's incredible. I got to meet him. I got to meet his dad. I want him by my side. And in spite of this, Doeg comes along and says, even if he's from the line of Peretz, he's disqualified. He's no good. He shouldn't even be counted amongst the congregation of Israel. And he goes on to elucidate on this idea that certain people shouldn't be allowed in. They shouldn't be counted among the Jewish people. And I'll spare you the back and forth on all the halakha, but in short, it says, a Moabite may not join the congregation of Israel, but a Moabitess, yes, that's permitted. And so, no problem. Ruth is good. And therefore, so is David. But Doeg has this thing. He just won't let go. And so he goes to Saul, and Saul's like, where did you get this idea? Go to Samuel. Go to Samuel. And Samuel says, Doeg's a heretic. You can't believe a word he says. But he continues. And so they send him to the court, and he argues basically with every single person. And he makes these wonderful arguments. They're so insightful. The people are dumbfounded, all the rabbis. And yet, there it is, right there. Moabite, Moabitess. It should be plain as the nose on his face. So on the bottom of page 3, I'm looking at Yoma 22. The question arises then, okay, Doeg, if you have this beef and you truly believe that David is no good, and therefore anyone who allies themselves with David is no good, and does so in the face of the king, and they ought to be put down, okay. But then why, when Saul turns around and says, turn on the priests, why did you go to Nob? Why did you go back there and then kill everybody else? What did the rest of the people do? I mean, if the priests did something, okay, but what about the rest of the townspeople? What about the women? Did they do something? What about the children? Did they do something? And even if they did, what about the animals? What did they do wrong? So it leads you to question, what's driving Doeg? There's got to be more than his zeal against David. I mean, the guy clearly has some issues. And so Ecclesiastes, the bottom of this text, is used as a proof text, right? That when he went down and killed men and women alike, infants and sucklings, donkeys and oxen and sheep, okay, the bat kol, the divine voice, comes down and says, do not be overly wicked. Do not be overly wicked. Don't be too zealous in carrying out orders, okay? And the 2 verses before that, Ecclesiastes says, in the span of my own life, I've seen both of these things. Sometimes a good man perishes in spite of his goodness, and sometimes a wicked one endures in spite of his wickedness. So, don't overdo goodness, and don't pretend that you're wise in excess, or you may be dumbfounded. Wise in excess. So, if we remember, what was Doeg accused of doing? He was accused of being basically a wise ass. He could ask 400 questions about a very specific piece of halakha, but miss the entire point. So here's my question that I want to leave you with. And it's the same question I ask about the opening text. What was worse? What was worse? That Doeg murdered 85 priests and the entire town of Nob? Or that he engaged in this Lashon Hara that Ahimelech refused to engage in and said, oh yeah, I saw the son of Jesse. I saw what he did. Here's what he did. Which is worse? The crime or the cover-up? Chag Sameach.
Thank you, Yashikoch, Cantor. Yashikoch to all of you. You get the champion award, and I didn't tell the others, but if you look underneath your seat, just kidding. All right. Well, I'm going to talk some about Ruth the Moabite. Ruth the Moabite, like I said, the first convert in Jewish tradition. And what we read, and what's interesting, though, about Ruth the Moabite, a couple things, is when we look at halakha, Jewish law, this is very problematic. Because Ruth, as we've discussed, who is she the great-grandmother of? King David, and our great king, which means she's the great-great-grandmother of King Solomon, our other great king. And who is going to be a descendant of Ruth? The Messiah. It's pretty cool. So what's the problem? Well, going back to the Torah, Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 3 says, an Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. Even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation. Now, does that mean that in the 11th generation it's okay for them to? No, this is a hyperbolic way of them saying, never. If you are a descendant of a Moabite, never shall you be allowed to enter the congregation. Pardon? For who? David? Ruth? No, Ruth was a Moabite. Like, she is Ruth Hamoviyah, the Ruth the Moabite. She's like first generation. Oh, I'm not sure, but this is saying that no descendant of a Moabite can ever be allowed into the people of Israel. And so if we take this literally, the rabbis discover we have a massive problem here. Because, therefore, King David, not a Jew. King Solomon, not a Jew. The Moshiach, not a Jew. And so the rabbis play with this a little bit in trying to grapple with this text. And perhaps this text was put in, was made this way by somebody trying to make a message. I've often said that when we look at the Torah, when we look at many parts of the Tanakh, a lot of it is a debate on intermarriage. We see how Moshe Rabbeinu, our great prophet, and when we get married, we say, Harayat Mekudeshet Li Tabat Zo Kedat Moshe v'Yisrael. I take you as my wife in accordance with the heritage of Moses and Israel. Moses himself had at least one wife, potentially two, neither of whom were Israelite. So, a lot of debate about intermarriage throughout the Bible, and I can give you many more examples. And so the rabbis finding themselves in a precarious position, especially because the rabbis are such big fans of David and excuse what at times we would say are inexcusable behaviors by David. They say, well, what the halacha meant here was no Ammonite or Moabite man can convert to Judaism. It says Moabite, not Moabitess, and that is what they say. But as Rabbi Hecht was saying on our panel a bit earlier, Rabbi, how acceptable is it for me to remind somebody that they are a convert or to refer to them as, as, let me pick a name, Rachel the convert? We don't do that. Not a good thing to do. In fact, what we often compare that to is if I were to have adopted a child and I said, this is Billy, my adopted son, or hi, I'm Billy's adopted father. You wouldn't do that. If I adopted a kid, I'd say, this is my son. I am his dad. This is his grandfather, even if biologically that's not the case. That's what we do. And yet, Ruth, when she takes on Judaism, this is in Ruth chapter 1, verse 16 and 17, where she says the words of your God will be my God, and makes a declaration of faith, becoming a part of the Jewish people. And so then we stop calling her Ruth the Moabite. No, we don't. We call her Ruth, continue to call her Ruth the Moabite 6 times after this. 6 times. And how do we reconcile this? Because as the rabbi shared here, that's not something we're supposed to do. In Baba Metzia 58b and 59a, a few quotes from the Talmud, it says, if one is penitent, another may not say to him, remember your earlier deeds. If one is the child of converts, another may not say to him, remember the deeds of your ancestors. As it's stated, and a convert or stranger shall you neither mistreat nor shall you oppress him. That comes from Exodus chapter 22, verse 20. And so the word, it says, ger, which can be translated as the stranger in your midst. This is the most common law in the Torah, is be kind to the stranger in your midst. Do not mistreat the stranger in your midst, for you were a stranger in the land of Israel. But again, the word it uses is gerim. And the word that we use for a convert is ger. It's the same word. So there's debate. Is this referring to a convert? Is this referring to somebody who is not Jewish? Big debate between the interpretation there. But to think about that, that would be like, let's say we had somebody in our community whose ancestry was Spanish. In fact, we have a lot of folks like that, and who had Catholics in their ancestry, and we said and this person converts to Judaism. They go through all this. They have Jewish children who've only known Judaism their whole lives, grow up in our community, become a bar mitzvah or a bat mitzvah, and we say to them in our religious school class, well, when Hannah's ancestors did the Inquisition against us in Spain, what a horrible thing that would be. The Talmud is saying you cannot do that. And if it goes on further to say, if one is a convert and he came to study Torah, one may not say to him, does the mouth that ate unslaughtered carcasses and animals that had wounds that would have caused them to die within 12 months and therefore be treif, and repugnant creatures and creeping animals come to study Torah that was stated from the mouth of the Almighty? No, somebody who's a convert comes to study Torah, we don't say, remember your disgusting past and all the gross stuff you used to eat. That would be a horrible, rude thing to say. And the Gemara asks, with regard to one who calls another a derogatory name, that is identical to one who shames him. Why are they listed separately? And the Gemara answers, although the victim grew accustomed to being called that name in place of his name, and he is no longer humiliated by being called that name, since the intent was to insult him, the perpetrator's punishment is severe. And so what is the intent behind calling Ruth the Moabite? Because as we read here in the Torah, Moabites don't always have the best reputation. Torah is not particularly flattering to Moabites. And so are we breaking Jewish law here, one, by admitting Ruth into the people of Israel, two, by then, once we admit her, calling her Ruth the Moabite instead of Ruth the Israelite, and thirdly, are we breaking Jewish law here? Because if our tradition does not hold Moabites in high regard, I have to admit, even these days when I bump into a Moabite at the grocery store, I get a little flustered. Anyways, it's too late to make jokes, I guess. Anyways, I'm still jet lagged. It's like morning time in Budapest. There is a place called, I guess I do meet Moabites from Moab, Utah. Good point. Yeah, they all have dirt bike shops, exactly. Great dirt bike shops. The Moabites are great at dirt bike shops. But is the intent here of calling her Ruth the Moabite to humiliate her? A great version of a commentary of the book of Ruth was written by one of my teachers at Hebrew College, Jewish Institute of Religion, and that was from Tamara Eskenazi. And she says in her commentary, it is hardly coincidental that this designation of Ruth the Moabite clings to Ruth precisely upon her arrival in Bethlehem. This is the first of 6 instances in referring to Ruth, the first time that Ruth is recalled Ruth the Moabite, Ruth chapter 1, verse 22. This is the first of 6 instances in which Ruth is called a Moabite and is so perceived by the residents of Bethlehem. Her Moabite status constitutes an obstacle given the mandated exclusion from the community prescribed in Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 4, that of intermarriage and conversion in the status of Moabites. So we see here that Ruth, in the beginning of the book of Ruth, has a very tough circumstance. In fact, most of the book of Ruth, she has a tough circumstance. Her husband dies. Her mother-in-law can be a little bit of a challenging character at times. She's separated then from her sister. Then she goes to the homeland of her mother-in-law, where she is at times harassed by people, where she does hard labor, and then goes into a levirate marriage. And so what Tamar Eskenazi is saying is this status of Moabite on top of everything else makes her acceptance a lot more challenging than if she was, Ruth the Egyptian or Ruth the Persian. This makes it more challenging because of that verse in the Torah. And later on, we see that Boaz, when he goes to marry Ruth, has to go in front of almost like a Beit Din of the elders of the community in order to get approval to marry Ruth. And one of the commentaries on that is not only because he found a kinsman that might be closer to Ruth than him, to Ruth's deceased husband than him, but also they had to have extra deliberations because of her Moabite status. So, what's interesting is that though we call Ruth the Moabite, we do not refer to her descendant, David, ever as David the Moabite. In fact, we have that song, David Melech Yisrael. It's not David the Moabite, it's David the King of Israel. When I was a rabbi in Los Angeles, I remember I served on the Sandra Kaplan Beit Din fairly regularly. And what the Sandra Kaplan Beit Din was it was kind of the first Beit Din of this type in the United States. It was a community Beit Din that was made up of Reform, Conservative, and Reconstructionist rabbis coming together to approve people for conversion, so that way they could hopefully, nowadays all those movements pretty much recognize each other's conversions, but this was to give people an extra layer of coverage in that it was recognized by all of those movements as they all participated in it together. And one rabbi I met at one of those Batei Din told me that when somebody converts, what do we do with their Hebrew name? If I were a convert and my name is Shmuel, what is my full Hebrew name? Say it a little there. Yeah, Shmuel ben Avraham v'Sarah, even though those are not my parents' names. Shmuel, the son of Abraham and Sarah, because ultimately Abraham and Sarah were the Jewish parents of all of us, and so we are adopted into that family, and they become our Jewish parents. But rather, this rabbi said, I don't do that. If your parents are not Jewish and you convert, I will make your Hebrew name Shmuel ben Gary Margaret. Or, you know what, if your parents' names are Gary and Margaret, and you want to find a Hebrew close equivalent, Gedalia Miriam. And I was like, well, why do you do that? That's not the custom when it comes to converts. And his answer was, because when you call up a convert for an aliyah and you say, Yamod, Shmuel ben Avraham, Sarah. What you are doing is you're outing that person as a convert to the whole community, and therefore, in this rabbi's interpretation, you are violating the Jewish commandment of not reminding a convert that they're a convert or othering a convert. By the way, I knew a Jew once whose parents' Hebrew names actually were Abraham and Sarah, and he told me, everybody thinks I convert. But anyhow, so interesting thought by this rabbi. So, and take a look at this page. Some of you know this page because some of you have been in my intro class, and this actually comes from our textbook. It's a famous letter that Maimonides wrote to Obadiah the convert. Thus says Moses, the son of Rabbi Maimon, one of the exiles from Jerusalem who lived in Spain. I received the question of the master Obadiah, the wise and learned convert. May God reward him for his work. May a perfect reward be bestowed upon him by the God of Israel, under whose wings he has sought cover. So a lot of accolades for him, a lot of cheering for him, and praise and admiration from Maimonides, our greatest philosopher, for this person who has converted. You ask me if you, too, are allowed to say in the blessing and prayers you offer alone in the congregation, our God and God of our fathers. You who have sanctified us through your commandments, you who have separated us, you who have chosen us, you who have inherited us, you who have brought us out of the land of Egypt, and more of this kind. I mean, after all, what Obadiah's question was, and he wrote all the way from Yemen, I believe it was, to Maimonides, who was living in Egypt at the time, was, can I say these things? Because after all, my ancestors weren't brought out of the land of Egypt, and my ancestors technically aren't Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And what Maimonides responds is, yes, you may say all this in the prescribed order and not change it in the least. In the same way as every Jew by birth says his blessing in prayer, you too shall bless and pray alike, whether you are alone or pray in the congregation. The reason for this is that Abraham, our father, taught the people, opened their minds, and revealed to them the true faith and the unity of God. He rejected the idols and abolished their adoration. He brought many children under the wings of the divine presence. He gave them counsel and advice, and ordered his sons and the members of his household after him to keep the ways of God forever. As it is written, for I have known him to the end, that he may command his children and his household after him, that they may keep the way of God, to do righteousness and justice. Ever since then, whoever adopts Judaism and confesses the unity of the divine name, as is prescribed in the Torah, is counted among the disciples of Abraham, our father, peace be with him. Therefore you shall pray, our God and God of our fathers, because Abraham, peace be with him, is your father. And you shall pray, you who have taken our fathers for your own, for the land has been given to Abraham, as it is said, walk through the land in the length of it and in the breadth of it, for I will give to you. There is no difference whatsoever between you and us. You shall certainly say the blessing, who has chosen us, who has given us, who has taken us for your own, and who has separated us for the Creator. May God be extolled, and indeed chosen you and separated you from the nations and given you the Torah. For the Torah has been given to us and to the converts, as is said, one ordinance shall be both for you of the congregation and also for the stranger that sojourns with you, an ordinance forever in your generations, as you are. So shall the stranger be before Adonai. Know that our fathers, when they came out of Egypt, were mostly idolaters. They had mingled with the pagans in Egypt and imitated their way of life until the Holy One, may he be blessed, sent Moses, our teacher, the master of all prophets, who separated us from the nations and brought us under the wings of the divine presence, us and all converts, and gave to all of us one law. Do not consider your origin inferior. While we are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you derive from the one through whose word the world was created. As is said by Isaiah, one shall say, I am Adonai's, and another shall call himself by the name of Jacob. Powerful text, one of my favorite Jewish texts. So my Monty's message is, yes, you say all those things too. You are as Jewish as I am. And on top of that, there is no difference between us. You are a part of this family, and even if you are not a direct descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, guess what? We are all direct descendants of Adam and Eve, and all of us were created by God in God's image. And so you are worthy of respect. So back to the question of Ruth. Is referring to her as Ruth, though Moabite, disrespectful? It depends how you look at it. On one hand, we are reminded throughout the whole story of Ruth that her origin is different, that she's not like us in a way. And that might come across as disrespectful. But at the same time, many people, when they are contemplating conversion to Judaism, they ask me questions like, I know I've given up my belief in Jesus or whatever, but do I have to give up my Mexican-American heritage? Do I have to never go over to my mom's house to celebrate Christmas again? Or something like this. I've even had people ask me, because it works this way in some other faiths, do I need to cut off my family? Is my family allowed to stay in touch with me? Or I remember having a woman with a giant cross come in one day, wanting to speak with me. I said, what's going on? She was very distraught, and she said, my son is converting to Judaism. Am I going to lose my son because of this? Is he going to be no longer allowed to be a part of my family? And this was very challenging for her. And the answer is no, of course not. With the Moabites, this is reference to an ethnic group. Like at the time, and we Jews have survived this, there were tribal identities and ethno-religions. And so perhaps while the Moabites had their own religion, they were also their own ethnic group. And so one way you can look at this text, like I said, you can read it from two different angles. We can read it as polemic against Ruth, or we can look at it as saying, even though you have now become an Israelite, don't forget where you came from. Don't shed that narrative of who you were. It's still valuable, and it should still be honored and cherished and treasured. It's this idea for us as Jews that we can not remind converts that they're converts. I always agree with it. I think the intent more is we are not allowed to other folks. We're not allowed to make them feel less than for being a convert. But what converts can bring to our tradition is more diversity, more perspectives. I've never been in a congregation with as many converts as this one. And with that too, I have never been in a congregation that has as much ethnic diversity, as many languages. Here in our synagogue of 440 families, we have people who are members from over 30 countries. That's incredible. And so a convert can add incredible richness to our story. We just need to make sure that, like we do with Ruth, or how we choose to read this with Ruth, because we end up reading at the very end of the book that she is a woman that should be incredibly honored, particularly with the lineage that she creates. In fact, my oldest daughter, her middle name is Ruth. That there's tremendous, not negativity, but pride that can go with this identity in this narrative, in this background that she has. So, in Shavuot, like I mentioned a bit earlier, one of the reasons I love Shavuot is it's about finding balance, I think, and seeing the two-way relationships. God chose to give us the Torah, and Ruth chose to receive the Torah. Had God chosen to give us the Torah, but we chose not to receive it, well, we wouldn't have had the Torah today. There would be no Judaism today. And had Ruth chosen to receive the Torah, or the people of Israel chose to receive the Torah, and God said, no, I'm going to go give it to the Hittites, we wouldn't have Torah. It required both sides making that choice. And likewise, when we look at Ruth, or when we look at converts, we have to find a way of balancing both their rich narrative and their story and their past, with at the same time valuing who they are today and who they will be tomorrow, and honoring that as well. Hag Sameach. That will conclude. Rabbi Hecht, you stay the whole time. Thank you so much. We were so grateful to have you and your teaching here. What a privilege for our community, and for me too. I took for granted when I was in LA learning from great rabbis and having HUC professors right around the corner. And now when we get a privilege like this, it really is a gift. So thank you. We've been very fortunate to have you in Utah this year. And please come back and visit Utah. We're so thrilled you chose our state for a year. And folks, tomorrow at 9:30, we will have our morning Shavuot service. And then following our service tomorrow, we'll continue our interfaith stuff with having a lunch and learn, where Jan Said, who is a leader in the local Baha'i faith, is going to talk about, again, kind of ideas of revelation and connections between Jews and Baha'i people. And then on Tuesday, we will have our day 2 Shavuot services at 9:30. Please help us make minyan or come and support. All right, thank you, everybody. Laila Tov, Hag Sameach, Martim L'Simcha. Go get some sleep. Way to go. Rabbi points for all of you who stayed.